Which Souls game has the best DLC? That is the question we will be answering today, and I'll be ranking each game on a tier list from S to F. So without further ado, let's start at the beginning by talking about Dark Souls 1. In today's day and age that is the absolute hellfest that is 2023, Dark Souls 1 and the infamous Artorias of the Abyss DLC are, well, you might as well say that they're Matt, Pat and Five Nights at Freddy's, because this shit is inseparable. The reason for this being the release of Dark Souls Remastered, which included the DLC into the base game, which may have been a thinly veiled attempt for FromSoft to be able to disguise the fact that DSR is basically just a more polished version of a free mod for the original game. But hey, at least we get the DLC for free, am I right, guys? But just putting that to one side for now, let's talk about the DLC. The Artorias of the Abyss DLC is an absolute must for anybody who plays this game. To be completely fair, I do actually like the fact that it's included in the remastered, but the price tag is still ridiculous for something that works out cheaper to just buy the original and the DLC on top of it. But never mind that. Now you may be wondering, well, what does the DLC actually add to the base game? To which I say, it actually does include quite a fair bit, such as 4 extra bosses and an entirely new area for you to explore. And then of course you have the story, which a lot of people are very quick to dismiss, but the story of the DLC is actually very important, as it gives a load more context to good old bucket hats over here that make them actually a tiny bit more tragic than they already were in DS3. As for the bosses in the DLC, we're gonna have a mini tier list ranking for them. Sanctuary Guardian, B tier. Pretty inoffensive, but my god is it annoying. Artorias, absolute S tier. This fight is the perfect example of Dark Souls 1 fights done right. Manus, A tier, pretty difficult, really nice design, but was just a bit underwhelming. And then finally, Calamite, B tier. Again, pretty cool hidden boss, but I wasn't too much of a fan of it. Just before we talk about the last part of the DLC, allow me to quickly explain how I'm going to be ranking these games. So these games as DLCs will be ranked on a tier list from S to F. The way I'm going to be deciding where they sit on the tier list is based off a few criteria. These criteria are the DLC bosses actually good? Do the DLC actually add more to the base game, or are they actually worth it? And finally, how good are the areas in the DLC? Now, just before we get back into it, I would just like to quickly ask that if you do enjoy this video, then you do consider subscribing. I'm trying to hit 1K by the end of the year so I can beat the broken ass Social Blade predictions, and any help you can show would be greatly appreciated. Anyways, let's get back into the video. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about in regards to the Dark Souls 1 DLC is, of course, the areas. The areas of the Artorias DLC are absolutely incredible, and it was a lot more expansive than what I was actually expecting it to be. And I genuinely enjoyed all of the areas, with my personal favorite area being the Ulasil Township, because I am an absolute whore for Broken City aesthetics. Don't worry, we're coming back to this later. However, although Dark Souls 1 has a really good DLC, I never thought it was all that great. It has one boss that I absolutely adore, and the rest are honestly just kind of meh, but I can't deny that it created a fantastic blueprint for the rest of the games to follow. So for that, it's gonna go in B tier. Next up is Dark Souls 2, and well, it is definitely one to talk about. On one hand, Dark Souls 2 is the only Souls game to have 3 DLCs, and it also was one of the first games to have really forgettable DLCs. It really did not take me long to start ripping on this game, but hey, what would I be if I wasn't a Dark Souls 2 hater? I'm being completely serious as well. The DLCs were that forgettable that I genuinely thought most of the game's area were actually just in the base game. And when researching for this video, I found that areas I don't even remember being in the game. But there is, however, one area I do remember, and it is not for the best reasons. And I am, of course, talking about the Frigid Outskirts, because how could I do a video on the DLCs and not even mention this part? Now, if you don't remember the Frigid Outskirts, then you clearly haven't played this area, but just to help you, allow me to recap what this area was. Basically, they took away your ability to see anything and slap a fucking gank boss in your face! Safe to say my memories of this area are not sweet. However, I do have to, of course, mention the amount of content that spans across these DLCs does make it essential to play the game. And hey, you know what? They are somewhat fun to play, but I've got to say that's really the only redeeming factor about this entire game, beside the music, of course. Speaking of which, I ranked every single Soulsborne game's music, so if you're interested in that, go and watch it after this video. The link will be in the description and on the end card at the end. But where does it sit on the tier list? And well, I'd have have to say it is an emphatic F. But hey, if you disagree with me, feel free to make your opinion heard in the comments, like I know you all really like doing. Now, of course, it is time for the next game, and next up is Dark Souls 3. Now, it is no secret that I adore Dark Souls 3, but I seriously believe that getting the DLC with this game is an absolute necessity for playing it, because without it, well, you can kind of beat the game in 6.5 hours on a casual playthrough, but primarily because it gives the end to this tragically beautiful story that has been told over the last 3 games, and it is truly incredible. However, I won't be going too deep into the story of the DLC because I do kind of want to save that for another video, so hey, keep your eyes out for that one. Dark Souls 3's DLC has some of the best boss fights in any FromSoft game, including Bloodborne, which is a very hard statement for me to make. But you know, just to save some time, to select a few of them, specifically Slave Knight Gale and Frida, aka the 2 biggest bosses in their respective DLCs. So let's start this endeavor into why the Dark Souls 3 DLC is so great by talking about Frida. Frida's fight from a technical standpoint is one of the longest in any of the games. This is due to the player having to beat 3 consecutive phases to finish out the fight. The first phase is actually pretty standard, but when it comes to the second, god damn, the fight goes from 0 to 100 really quickly, and it stays there until you either give up and let the Father Ariandel smack your ass like a drum, or you just die. But if that happens, then you need to restart the entire fight over from quite literally square one. The fight is absolutely brutal and incredibly unforgiving. And to be completely honest, the only way to beat it is just by slamming your head off a wall repeatedly until you eventually go through it, in which case then you have the technique down. And then you have Slave Knight Gale. Gale is relentlessly aggressive and genuinely very difficult. Not as much as Frida, but it's still an incredibly big challenge. But to be completely honest, this fight is one that I've talked about quite a lot in my previous videos, so if you want to hear my genuine thoughts about why it's so difficult, then go and watch my other videos. But the thing I really want to talk about with this specific DLC is of course the story. The Ring City, without spoiling it, shows the decay of a very important city in the entire series' lore. And actually getting to see the scale of this city is just indescribably orgasmic. So, where am I going to rank it? And of course, Dark Souls 3 is going in A tier. Oh, what? You thought I was going to put it in S tier? To be completely honest, I really did want to put it in S tier, but due to the underwhelming nature of a lot of the other bosses and the DLCs, I can't put it anywhere above A. So that's exactly where it's going to go. Anyway, let's move on to Bloodborne. And oh boy, am I excited to talk about this one. Okay, let's get right into this. Bloodborne is phenomenal, but when you add an even more broken down and twisted gothic environment, it becomes indescribable. No matter what word I choose to sum up this game and the DLC, it will not do it a single degree of justice. The DLC for Bloodborne makes the game 10 times better, and I don't even think that's a controversial statement to make. Unfortunately, this is another game like Dark Souls 3 where it is required to have the DLC to adjust how long the playtime actually is, but even the base game is actually pretty long. The Old Hunters DLC features 4 new bosses and 3 completely new areas, and all of them absolutely slap! Let's quickly talk about the bosses. Ludwig the Accursed's design, fight, and music make for one of the most memorable fights in gaming history, and I would honestly go as far to say that it makes for a better fight than Ornstein and Smo, which is a very, very hard statement for me to make because that is one of my favorite fights in this entire franchise. Then of course you have Lady Maria. Lady Maria of the Astral Clock Tower's attacks and area are just beautiful, and it makes for a better version of the Artorias fight. Maria's fight is what I imagine FromSoft wanted Artorias to be, but due to the limitations of the game, it couldn't. The Orphan of Cause is brutally difficult, to the point that this fight actually added about 4 hours to the playtime of the DLC for me, and even this attempt to the fight that you're seeing right now, I barely managed to beat him. It is actually a miracle that I survived this, and what makes this fight even better is of course his lore. Basically, to summarize the Orphan's lore, it goes like this. Humans invaded the fishing hamlet, slaughtered the locals, and found Cause on the beach, and then ended up killing her, and then they left Cause to rot by himself as an orphan. So the Cause fight no longer becomes about killing this really difficult, scrawny little white dude. It now becomes the tale of putting this orphan who all he wants to do is protect his mother from any more harm to rest. This is one of those fights in the franchise that when I completed it, I did not feel good about myself, which of course isn't uncommon in this franchise, but my god, does it make it more memorable. And then finally you have the Living Failures. Yeah, we're not even gonna bother talking about them. That fight really is just what it says on the tin. So where does Bloodborne sit on the tier list? And of course, Bloodborne is going straight into S tier. Unlike the other games on this list, Bloodborne is the only one I do not need to question whether it deserves this rank or not, because it objectively just does. And that closes out the rankings. If you enjoyed this video, then you will love my ranking of the Soulsborne music. That, of course, will be on the end screen right now and linked in the playlist in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you all next time.